My grandmother's will was a cruel joke. To inherit her fortune, I had to survive for 30 days with no money in her abandoned, crumbling mansion. My greedy aunt and uncle were watching, waiting for me to fail. I thought her final wish was a punishment. I had no idea it was a breadcrumb trail that would lead me to the truth of who she was and who I was meant to be. Before we get into it, I'd love to know what city are you watching from today? And be sure to subscribe for our daily stories. Okay, let's head to that while reading. My grandmother, Matilda Blackwood, was not a warm and fuzzy woman. She was a matriarch, a titan of industry, a woman carved from granite and quiet, calculating ambition. I had loved her, of course, but it was the kind of love a small, nervous foot soldier has for a distant and deeply intimidating five-star general. In her eyes, I was a disappointment, a quiet, artistic girl with a mountain of student debt, and a distinct lack of her own ruthless ambition. So, when I was summoned to the reading of her will, I expected nothing. I sat in the stuffy wood-paneled law office, a small insignificant island of second-hand clothes, adrift in a sea of my relatives' expensive, tailored morning attire. My aunt and uncle, Marcus and Brenda, were the stars of this particular show. They sat in the plush chairs opposite the lawyer's desk, their faces a perfect practice performance of somber grief. But their eyes, their sharp, greedy eyes, were gleaming with the thrill of the impending financial kill. The lawyer, a man as old and as dry as the documents he was reading, began. He listed a few minor bequests to charities, and then he came to the main event, the disposition of the Blackwood estate, a fortune rumored to be in the tens of millions. The entirety of my remaining estate, the lawyer read, his voice a dry, greedy thing, including all properties, stocks, bonds, and liquid assets I leave in its entirety, to my beloved granddaughter, Cora. The silence in the room was absolute. I just stared, my own mind a complete white blank. And then I looked at my aunt and uncle. Their faces, which had been so full of a smug, confident expectation, were now a mask of pure, ugly, and deeply satisfying shock. But then the lawyer cleared his throat. However, there is a condition. The smug, predatory smiles began to creep back onto my relatives' faces. My granddaughter's inheritance, the will continued, is entirely and completely contingent upon the successful completion of a single final task. She must, for a period of no less than 30 consecutive days, reside alone in my old and currently uninhabited country mansion, Blackwood Manor. The lawyer looked up at me over his glasses. The terms are specific. You must arrive with nothing but the clothes on your back. No money, no phone, no outside contact. You must survive on whatever you can find within the bounds of the property. Your aunt and uncle, he gestured to my now beaming relatives, have been appointed as the official monitors of this test. They are permitted to check on you once a week to confirm that you have not left the grounds. If you fail or if you quit at any time, the entirety of the estate in full reverts to them. The room was silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. It was the silence of a cruel and deeply, deeply personal joke, a final posthumous act of psychological warfare from a grandmother I never truly understood. She was not giving me a gift. She was punishing me for my softness, for my lack of her own ruthless survival instinct. She was throwing me to the wolves, and she had just handed my own greedy and now very happy aunt and uncle the keys to the cage. The lawyer drove me to the manor that afternoon. It was a 2-hour drive out of the city, deep into the wild, overgrown countryside. He dropped me at the foot of a long winding and deeply unwelcoming driveway. The massive wrought iron gates groaning shut behind me like the doors of a prison. I looked up at the house. It was not the beautiful, vibrant home I vaguely remembered from my childhood. It was a ruin, a dark, gothic, and deeply intimidating silhouette against the gray, unforgiving sky. The windows were boarded up, the paint was peeling, the gardens were a wild, entangled jungle. My aunt and uncle thought this was a test of my endurance, a game they were certain I would lose. My grandmother, I thought, as a cold, hard rain began to fall, had simply designed the most elaborate and most cruel punishment she could imagine. I had no idea that the test wasn't about surviving the house at all. It was about the house and the forgotten secret and deeply, deeply important story it held, finally and completely saving me. I pushed the heavy oak door open. It groaned, a low, guttural sound of protest. The noise of a house that had been asleep for a long time. The air that hit me from inside was cold and still, thick with the scent of dust and damp stone, and the faint papery perfume of decay. A thick blanket of gray dust covered every surface, turning the air hazy in the thin shafts of afternoon light that pierced through the grimy, boarded-up windows. My first hours in Blackwood Manor were a slow and chilling lesson in the reality of my new situation. This was not a game. It was a prison. The lawyer had been telling the truth. The electricity was dead. The water from the taps ran a rusty, angry brown before sputtering out completely. My world was now defined by the dying light of the afternoon and the encroaching absolute darkness of the night. I spent what was left of the day in a frantic and largely fruitless search for the basics of survival. I found a stack of old, musty-smelling linens in a cedar chest, but they were thin and offered little comfort against the biting cold that was now seeping up through the floorboards. I found a few half-burned candles in a kitchen drawer, their wicks brittle with age. The night when it came was a thing of absolute and terrifying blackness. I huddled on a large sheet-covered sofa in the main drawing room, my body wrapped in a dusty velvet curtain I had torn from one of the windows. The house, which had been silent during the day, was now alive with a symphony of alien sounds. The wind howled through the eaves, a low, mournful sound. The old wooden bones of the house groaned and settled around me, and in the walls, I could hear the constant, tiny, and unsettling scuttling of unseen things. I did not sleep. I just sat there in the dark, my own hunger, a sharp, gnawing ache in the pit of my stomach, and I felt the full crushing weight of my grandmother's cruelty. This was not a test. It was a punishment. A cold and calculated and deeply personal act of caustic contempt. I thought of my aunt and uncle, of their smug, victorious faces. They were right. I was going to fail. I was a city girl, a creature of comfort and convenience. I was not a survivor. I decided then and there in the cold and the dark and the profound and absolute loneliness of that terrible night that I would quit in the morning. But the morning when it came brought with it a new and unexpected ally, the sun. It streamed through the tall, grimy windows, chasing the worst of the shadows from the corners of the room and turning the dust motes into a swirling golden galaxy. The house, in the light of day, was not a monster. It was just a sad and very old and deeply, deeply neglected house. Driven by a hunger that was now a raw and undeniable force, I began a more methodical search. I went to the kitchen, to the large walk-in pantry at the back. It was mostly empty, a sad and dusty graveyard of expired spices and empty jars. I was about to give up to admit my final pathetic defeat when I saw it. On the very top shelf, tucked away in the back, was a single solitary and beautifully preserved glass jar. It was a large jar of my grandmother's famous home-canned peaches, the ones she used to make every summer. And beside it, as if left there by a ghost, was a small, old-fashioned, and rust-free manual can opener. My hands were shaking as I took the jar down. The lid was sealed tight, a testament to my grandmother's skill. It took me 10 long and deeply frustrating minutes of grunting and cursing, but I finally, with a triumphant metallic pop, broke the seal. I sat on the dusty checkered floor of my grandmother's old kitchen in a pool of golden morning sunlight and I ate those peaches with my bare hands. They were the single greatest and most delicious thing I have ever tasted in my entire life. They tasted of summer. They tasted of a life I had forgotten. They tasted of hope. I sat there, the sweet, sticky syrup, a burst of pure, life-affirming energy in my empty stomach. It was a small thing, a single can of peaches left on a high shelf. But it was not a random thing. My grandmother had been a planner, a strategist, a woman who thought 10 moves ahead. And this, I knew with a sudden and absolute certainty, was not just a meal. It was a message, a clue. I looked around the vast, silent, and now much less intimidating house, and I realized that this place was not empty at all. It was a puzzle, a map, and I had just in the most delicious and most unexpected way possible, found the very first piece. My mission was no longer just to survive. It was to explore, to search, to understand. I began a methodical room-by-room exploration of the house, not as a squatter looking for scraps, but as an archaeologist, looking for signs of a life that had been hidden from me. The house was a time capsule. Each room a different chapter of my grandmother Matilda's life. The grand formal living room was filled with the ghosts of the powerful, successful businesswoman she had become. But it was in the small, forgotten, and more personal spaces that I began to find the real her. Her study was the most revealing of all. It was not the cold corporate office I had expected. Yes, one wall was lined floor to ceiling with imposing leather-bound books on finance and economics and the art of the deal. But the other walls, they were filled with poetry, with classic literature, with worn, well-loved, and deeply, deeply sentimental novels. It was a room of a secret and profound contradiction. It was there, as my fingers traced the spines of the books, that I found it, a single solitary volume that was completely and totally out of place. It was a book on botany, on the language of flowers, tucked away between a biography of an oil tycoon and a treatise on corporate law. I pulled it from the shelf. It was not a book. It was a box hollowed out, its interior lined with a soft, faded velvet, but it was empty. My heart sank, a dead end. But as I went to slide the book box back into its place on the shelf, my fingers brushed against the back of the bookshelf itself, and I felt it, a small, almost imperceptible click. The entire section of the bookshelf, the one holding the dense and deeply boring volumes on corporate law, swung silently and smoothly inward, revealing a small, dark, and completely hidden room. My grandmother, the woman of secrets, had had a secret study. I stepped inside. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and dried ink. And there on a small, simple, and beautifully carved wooden desk was a single solitary object, a thick, leather-bound, and deeply, deeply personal-looking journal. I sat in her hidden chair, a place where no one but she had sat for decades, and with a reverence I did not know I possessed, I opened the first page. The handwriting was not the strong, confident script of the matriarch I knew. It was the young, hopeful, and slightly uncertain script of a girl. September 14, 1955, the first entry began. I am 16 years old today, and I have decided that I will not be a farmer's wife. I will not live and die in this small, dusty town. I have a mind for numbers, and I have a dream. A dream of a world that is bigger than this one. I do not know how I will get there, but I will. I swear it. I sat on the floor of my grandmother's secret study. The words of the young and fiercely determined girl she had once been, a revelation in the dusty silence. This wasn't a punishment. This wasn't a cruel game. It was a story. Her story. The real story. A story she had hidden from the world, from her own greedy and deeply disappointing children, and had for some strange and wonderful and deeply, deeply mysterious reason chosen me, the quiet, artistic, and unambitious granddaughter, to be the one to find. I looked at the book in my hands. On the spine in a small, elegant gold leaf script were two simple words. Volume 1. My grandmother had not just left me a clue. She had left me a library. And I knew with a certainty that was a new and powerful and deeply comforting warmth in my chest that this old haunted house was full of them. And my job for the next 29 long and now very, very exciting days was to find them all. I spent the next 3 weeks on a treasure hunt through the landscape of my grandmother's past. The house, which had once been a cold and intimidating prison, was now a map, a puzzle box, and each room held a new piece of the extraordinary life of the woman I had so badly misunderstood. She was not just a matriarch. She was a legend, and I was her only and final student. The hunt was her curriculum. The clue in the first journal, the one I had found in the secret study, was a simple childish rhyme about the stars. It led me, after a full day of searching, to the old abandoned nursery on the 3rd floor. There, tucked away in a dusty, forgotten hope chest, under a pile of my own mother's baby blankets, was the 2nd volume. This journal was different. It was not the story of a determined, ambitious girl. It was the story of a young woman's first and only true love. I read of a man whose name was not my grandfather's. A brilliant and kind and penniless young artist she had been forbidden to see by her own wealthy and powerful family. I read of their secret meetings, of their plans to run away together, of a love that was as brilliant and as doomed as a falling star. The journal ended abruptly with a single tear-stained and heartbreaking entry. He is gone and I am alone. The clue in that journal led me to the grand formal library. There, hidden behind a loose brick in the back of the massive stone fireplace, I found the third volume. This one was written in a new and harder and more cynical hand. It was the story of a woman rebuilding herself from the ashes of a broken heart. It was the story of her brilliant and often ruthless rise in the business world. It was the story of the birth of the Blackwood Empire. It was the story of the woman the world knew. A woman I now understood had been forged in a fire I had never known existed. With each new journal I found, the story of her life became my own. And as I read, I was also living a story of my own survival. I learned to build a fire in the old fireplace. I learned to find the edible mushrooms and wild berries that grew in the overgrown, forgotten corners of the garden. I grew thinner, yes, but I also grew stronger, more resourceful, more confident. I realized, my grandmother's granddaughter in more than just name. The weekly visits from my aunt and uncle, Marcus and Brenda, became a source of a quiet and satisfying amusement. They would arrive, their faces a mask of a false, pitying concern, expecting to find me a broken, weeping mess, ready to surrender. "It's not too late to quit, Cora," my uncle Marcus had said on his second visit, a smug, predatory glint in his eye. "There is no shame in admitting you can't handle it." They would find me not weeping, but sitting calmly by a crackling fire, a leather-bound journal in my lap, my face serene. My new and hard-won peace infuriated them. They could not understand it. They saw the house as a punishment. They had no idea it was actually a classroom. I held the fifth and second to last journal in my hands, the story of my grandmother's later years, of her own quiet and often difficult motherhood. I had learned of her heartbreak, of her ambition, of her quiet and often lonely life. The test she had set for me, a test I was now certain she had always known I would pass, was almost over. I was not afraid anymore. I was ready. My aunt and uncle were due for their final official inspection in just a few days. They were coming to this house expecting to claim a fortune. They had no idea that I had already found the real treasure, the one that could not be bought or sold. And I was now finally and completely ready to show them exactly what it was worth. The knock on the front door when it came was a jarring intrusion. It was them, my aunt and uncle, Marcus and Brenda, arriving for their final official and I was sure triumphant inspection. I did not run. I did not hide. I walked to the door, a new and unfamiliar sense of purpose in my own heart. They were a sight to behold. They stood on the front porch dripping with expensive designer gear. Their faces a mask of a smug, predatory, and deeply satisfied confidence. They were here for the final easy kill. "Cora, darling, there you are," my Aunt Brenda said, her voice a sweet cloying purr. "Don't tell us you've given up. It's so close to the end. Your father and I were just about to check the property for any irregularities before we assume ownership of the estate." I just looked at her and at my uncle Marcus, who was standing there with a clipboard, a pen poised, a look of a cold business-like impatience. They saw my stillness as defeat. They had no idea it was my strength. "Please," I said, my voice quiet, but it carried to every corner of the vast, dusty foyer. "The test is over, and I think you both need to see the results." They walked in, a trail of mud from their expensive shoes staining the original hardwood floors. They walked into the main living room to the fireplace where I had built a small, welcoming and very real fire, and they saw the journals, a neat, organized stack of them from Volume 1 to Volume 5, sitting on the small, unassuming mahogany coffee table. A beautiful and undeniable monument to a life they had believed was a simple and worthless thing. My aunt and uncle just stared at them, their mouths slightly agape. "Did you know, Uncle Marcus?" I began, my voice a calm and quiet and deeply dangerous thing. That grandma wrote about you in her diaries about the time you broke her favorite porcelain teacup and blamed it on the dog. She said you were a kind boy, but you were always afraid of taking responsibility. Marcus's face went white. The story was from his childhood, a secret that only he and his mother could have ever known. And you, Aunt Brenda, I continued, turning to her, a small, cold, and deeply pitying smile on my face. Did you know that she wrote about you, too? About the way you would secretly steal her heirloom necklace to wear to your parties? She said you were a beautiful girl, but she worried that you were more in love with the appearance of wealth than with the wealth of a good heart. Their smug, confident masks of victory had vanished, replaced by a new and terrible and deeply, deeply vulnerable terror. They realized with a dawning, soul-shattering horror that this house was not empty. It was full. It was full of the ghosts of a lifetime of their own unspoken and unforgivable lies. The test wasn't about the house, I said, my voice now a whisper, but it carried the weight of my grandmother's entire wise and magnificent life. It was about the journals. It was about me learning who she was. And I did. I learned her whole story. The story of a brave, strong woman who was let down by her own children. The story of a woman who was determined to be a mother to the end. The story of a woman who had in the end passed her legacy on to the one person who she knew would honor it. I then walked to the fireplace to the small hidden safe I had found. After reading the final cryptic clue in the last journal, I opened it and I pulled out a single neatly folded and very official-looking document. The true original and legally binding will. I handed it to my aunt. You can read it if you want. She took it from me, her hand trembling, and her eyes, my grandmother's eyes, quickly scanned the final and most important words on the page. I watched as her face crumpled as her last desperate hope turned to dust. My grandmother, in her final act of wisdom, had not just left me her fortune. She had left her final and very, very different message. And as I looked at the defeated, broken people who were my aunt and uncle, I knew that the real and far more important work of honoring my grandmother's legacy was just about to begin. Attached to the will was another smaller and sealed envelope addressed to me in my grandmother's familiar and elegant script. It read to be opened only at the conclusion of the test. With my aunt and uncle as my unwilling and deeply captive audience, I broke the seal. It was one last letter from her. And it was not a letter of triumph. It was a letter of a profound and deeply strategic compassion. My dearest, dearest Cora, I read aloud. My own voice a quiet steady instrument of her final wishes. If you are reading this, it means you have done what I always knew you could do. It means you have not just survived. It means you have understood. You have found my story and in doing so, you have begun to write your own. I have left you my entire fortune. It is a great and heavy and often terrible burden, but I know you have the character to carry it. But I am leaving you with more than just my money. I am leaving you with a final and most important mission. I looked up at my aunt and uncle who were now watching me. A new and deeply unfamiliar look of fearful anticipation on their faces. My son, your Uncle Marcus, and his wife Brenda are not bad people. They are just lost. They have spent their entire lives in the shadow of my success and they have come to believe that money is the only measure of a person's worth. I am to blame for this. I was not a good mother to him. I was a better CEO than I was a parent and that is my life's one and greatest regret. I do not wish to punish them with poverty, the letter continued. I wish to cure them with purpose. So, the will has one final and non-negotiable condition. A portion of the estate is to be used to establish the Blackwood Family Foundation, a charitable organization dedicated to the arts and to the preservation of local history. All the things your uncle has always called frivolous. And you, my darling Cora, will be its chairwoman. And your aunt and uncle, I read, delivering the final brilliant checkmate. If they wish to receive their own generous yearly inheritance from the estate, they will have no choice but to accept a position. They will work for you, for the foundation, for the next 5 years. They will learn by the work of their own hands that a legacy is not a thing you inherit, but a thing you build. The story ends not with a victory but with a new and deeply challenging beginning. It is a year later. I am sitting at the head of a large polished mahogany table. I am not in a corporate boardroom. I am in the newly restored library of Blackwood Manor, which is now the official headquarters of the Blackwood Family Foundation. The room is filled with the warm afternoon sunlight and with the quiet, respectful murmur of a board meeting. My aunt and uncle are there. They are not the same smug, arrogant people from a year ago. They are quieter. They are humbled. And they are, to my profound and unending surprise, good at their jobs. My uncle Marcus, with his sharp business mind, has become a brilliant and surprisingly passionate fundraiser. My Aunt Brenda, with her extensive social connections, has become a formidable event planner for our charity, galas. They are not just my employees. We are for the very first time in our entire and deeply complicated lives a family. A strange and broken and now finally and truly healing. My grandmother had not just left me a house full of her memories. She had left me a roadmap. A map that had led me not just to my own strength, but to the hidden and long-forgotten goodness in the hearts of the very people I had once thought were my enemies. She had not just taught me her story. She had, with her last and most brilliant act of love, made me the author of ours. An absolutely brilliant and mature story about a grandmother's incredible foresight and a test that was about more than just survival. What do you think of the grandmother's final shocking condition in her will? Let us know in the comments below. If you were moved by this powerful story of a family's healing, please show your support by hitting that like button and be sure to subscribe for more thought-provoking and emotional stories. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next.